My father said you needed a wife, she murmured, standing in the doorway of the forge with dust still clinging to the hem of her dress. Caleb Hart didn't look up from the horseshoe glowing orange on his anvil. Your father says a lot of things, Miss Whitfield. He means it this time. Her voice didn't shake, though her hands, folded in front of her, betrayed a tremor. He's already signed the paper. That made him set down the hammer. The forge sat at the edge of Piedra Seca, a town that smelled of coal smoke and cattle dust even in the cold months, where the wind came down off the ridge like it was looking for something to punish. Caleb had built the place with his own hands 3 years back, after the war spat him out somewhere south of nowhere and he'd walked until his boots gave out. He hadn't wanted a house. He hadn't wanted neighbors. He had wanted iron and fire and work that didn't ask questions, and for a long while, Piedra Seca had let him have that. Now a girl stood in his doorway holding her whole life folded into a satchel, telling him her father had traded her like a debt. He wiped his hands on his apron, buying time he didn't have. What paper? The one that says Emery Whitfield owes the Larrabee Trading Company $400 he doesn't have, and the one that says his daughter marries into a household with means before the note comes due. She said it flat, like she'd rehearsed it in the wagon the whole ride over, worn the words smooth so they wouldn't cut her on the way out. You're the only man in 3 counties Larrabee can't touch. My father thinks that makes you safe. Your father thinks wrong. Caleb picked the tongs back up, more out of needing his hands to do something than any real interest in the horseshoe. I'm not marrying a stranger to settle somebody else's debt. Then he'll be ruined, and I'll be given to Silas Boone instead, and you can go back to your fire. Her chin lifted on Boone's name, just slightly, just enough that Caleb caught the flinch under the defiance. I came to ask you plain, not to beg. If the answer's no, I'll ride back and tell him. He studied her then, really studied her, a woman maybe 22, 23, in a dress patched twice at the sleeve, dust on her boots from a 2-hour ride she hadn't complained about once. Her eyes were the kind that didn't look away first. There was a thin white scar along her jaw, old, the kind a person only got from something that had truly tried to kill them. Boone, Caleb said slowly. The name means something to you. It means I'd rather marry a man who doesn't want me than one who does. She said it without drama, which was somehow worse than if she'd wept. Well. Somewhere behind the forge, a horse nickered, restless. Caleb thought of the 4 years he'd spent learning exactly how much a person could survive and still keep walking, and of the 2 years since, learning how much a person could survive alone before the walking stopped mattering. He thought of Silas Boone, whom he'd met exactly twice, and disliked both times for reasons that had nothing to do with business. Maybe, he said, you ought to come in and sit down first. A man doesn't sign his name to a woman's whole life standing in a doorway. She didn't move. That a yes. That's a maybe, he said again, and something in her shoulders came down half an inch, like she hadn't let herself hope until just then, and hadn't meant to. Behind her, the road out of town lay pale and long under the afternoon sun, and dust rose in the distance, a rider, coming fast, coming from the direction of the Larrabee spread. Caleb saw it over her shoulder and felt the old cold settle into his chest, the one that used to come before a skirmish. Miss Whitfield, he said, quiet now. Get inside. Now. She turned, saw the rider, and for the first time her composure cracked, not into fear exactly, but into the particular stillness of someone who has learned that stillness is safer than screaming. That's one of Boone's men, she said. I know, said Caleb, and reached for the rifle he kept propped behind the bellows, and understood that whatever answer he gave her was about to be tested a great deal sooner than either of them wanted. The rider was a lean man named Purcell, one of Boone's regular hands, and he pulled up short of the forge with the careless ease of someone who expected doors to open for him. Miss Whitfield, Purcell said, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. Mr. Boone was expecting you at the Larrabee office an hour past. Mr. Boone wasn't promised my hour, Mara said. He was promised a signature, and my father hasn't given it yet. Your father gave Mr. Boone his word. Purcell's eyes slid to Caleb, taking in the forge, the rifle now resting easy in his hands, the way Caleb had positioned himself half a step in front of the girl without seeming to have moved at all. "And you'd be the blacksmith. Didn't figure you for a man who meddles in other folks' contracts." "Wasn't meddling I had in mind," Caleb said. "Just hospitality." "She rode a long way in this heat. She'll ride further before the day's done, one way or the other." Purcell smiled, thin. "Mr. Boone don't like waiting." "Then Mr. Boone can ride out here himself and not like waiting to my face," Caleb said, and something in his voice made Purcell's horse shift under him, sensing more than the man did. Purcell held the stare a moment longer, then wheeled his horse around. "This ain't finished, blacksmith." "Didn't figure it was," Caleb said to the retreating dust. When the rider was gone, Mara let out a breath she'd clearly been holding since the doorway. "You didn't have to do that. Didn't have to do a lot of things." Caleb set the rifle back against the wall, feeling the weight of what he'd just started settle into his shoulders. "You want to tell me what a man like Boone wants bad enough to threaten a blacksmith over a marriage he isn't part of?" She was quiet a long moment, turning something over, trust, maybe, or the lack of practice in giving it. "My mother's land," she said finally. 40 acres along the creek, deeded to her before she died, deeded to me after. Boone spent 2 years trying to buy it, and I've spent 2 years telling him no. My father's debt is real, but it's also convenient. If I marry Boone, the land comes with me. If I marry someone else, he loses the land clean. He loses it forever," she said. "That's why he sent Purcell instead of asking nice. Boone doesn't ask nice for things he thinks are already his." Caleb turned that over the way he turned a blade, looking for the weak seam, the place it might break under pressure. "Your father know all this?" "My father knows the debt is real and the rest is my problem to manage." There was no bitterness in it, just weariness, the kind that came from carrying something alone for longer than a person should have to. "He's not a cruel man, Mr. Hart. He's a frightened one. There's a difference, though it costs the same." "I know the difference," Caleb said, thinking of choices he'd made in the war that had felt like fear dressed up as duty. "Don't make it easier to forgive, most days." She looked at him then, really looked, the way she hadn't in the doorway when she'd been reciting her rehearsed lines. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "A harder man. Boone said you kept to yourself because you liked the quiet better than people." "Maybe I do." Caleb picked up the tongs again, turning the cooling horseshoe over without purpose. "Doesn't mean I like watching a man corner a woman with paper he had no right drawing up." "So that's a yes, then. To the marriage." "That's a maybe I'm not done thinking on," he said, and this time there was the faintest ghost of something almost like humor under the words. "You strike me as a woman who doesn't need rescuing so much as backing." "There's a difference in that, too." Mara's throat worked once before she answered. "Backing costs a man something, out here. Boone won't forget you stood between us today." "I've been forgotten by worse men than Boone," Caleb said. "Go on and eat something. You look like you haven't in 2 days, and whatever we decide, we'll decide it better with food in you." She hesitated at the door of the small house behind the forge, glancing back at him with something unreadable crossing her face, gratitude, maybe, or the beginning of trust, fragile as new ice. "Why would you do this? Truly. Not for the debt, not for spite against Boone." "Why?" Caleb considered lying, considered the easy answer about neighborliness and Christian duty. Instead he told her the truth, plain as he knew how. "Because 4 years of war taught me exactly how a man looks when he's decided someone else's life is worth less than his convenience. I've worn that look myself, more than once. I'm not eager to watch it on Boone's face and do nothing." Outside, the sun tilted toward evening, and far off toward the Larrabee spread, dust rose again, not one rider this time, but several, and slower, the deliberate pace of men in no hurry because they believed the outcome already belonged to them. They came at dusk, for riders with Boone himself at the front, a broad man with a beard clipped close and eyes that measured everything the way a buyer measured cattle. Caleb heard them before he saw them, the particular unhurried rhythm of hooves that belonged to men who'd never once considered they might not get what they came for. Heart. Boone reined up outside the forge, not dismounting, which was its own kind of insult. Understand you had words with my man Purcell. Had words with a man riding onto my property uninvited, Caleb said. There's a difference. There's also a girl in your house who's promised to me. Boone's gaze slid past Caleb to the doorway, where Mara had gone still, one hand braced against the frame. Miss Whitfield. Your father's expecting you back before dark. My father knows where I am, Mara said, and her voice, Caleb noticed, had lost none of its steadiness, though her knuckles had gone white on the wood. Does he know you've taken up with the blacksmith? Boone's mouth curved, not quite a smile. Because from where I sit, this looks like a woman trying to slip a debt she doesn't have the right to slip. The debt is my father's, Mara said. The land was my mother's, and it's mine. Neither one has your name on it, Mr. Boone, whatever you've convinced yourself. Boone's smile thinned to nothing. Careful, girl. Caleb stepped forward, deliberate, putting himself square in Boone's line of sight. You've said your piece. Now you can ride back the way you came. You don't know what you're stepping into, Hart. Boone's voice had dropped, gone low and cold, the tone of a man used to threats landing soft and heavy at once. I've spent 2 years being patient about that creek land. I don't intend to spend a third. Then maybe your patience was never the point, Caleb said. Maybe you just don't like losing. For a moment nobody moved. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of the coming night, sage and cooling dust and, underneath it, the sharper smell of the coal banked low in the forge behind them. One of Boone's riders shifted his hand toward his hip, slow, testing. Don't, Caleb said, without raising his voice, and something in the flatness of it made the rider go still. Boone studied Caleb a long moment, recalculating. You fought in the war. Long enough to know exactly how this ends if your man finishes that reach, Caleb said. Long enough to not much care for finding out again. It was Mara who broke the standoff, stepping out from the doorway despite Caleb's low word of caution, coming to stand at his side with her chin lifted the way it had been in his doorway that afternoon. Mr. Boone. I am not now, nor was I ever, promised to you. Whatever arrangement my father implied, it was never mine to give. You may take that up with him. You will not take it up with a rifle at this man's door. Boone's eyes moved between them, weighing something Caleb couldn't read, pride, maybe, or the first crack of a man realizing the ground beneath his certainty had shifted. This isn't finished, he said finally, echoing his own man's words from hours before, and Caleb understood then that Boone had run out of moves that didn't cost him something he wasn't yet willing to pay. Get off my land, Caleb said. Boone wheeled his horse, and his riders followed, and the dust of their leaving hung gold and slow in the last of the light. But before he was fully gone, Boone turned in the saddle, and his gaze found Mara with a look that had nothing patient left in it at all. Tell your father the note comes due in 3 days, he called back. With or without you, girl, I'll have that land. There's more than one way to take a thing that won't be given. The riders vanished into the dusk, and for a long moment neither Caleb nor Mara spoke, the silence between them heavier than it had been all day. He means it, Mara said finally, her voice thinner now that the danger had passed and left only the fear behind. Whatever's left of his patience, it's gone. Caleb looked toward the darkening road, toward the ridge beyond it where Boone's riders had disappeared, and felt the old cold certainty of a man who has seen exactly this kind of threat before and knows it does not simply ride away. Then we'd best decide what we're doing, and decide it before 3 days is one. They sat that night at the small table in Caleb's house, a lamp burning low between them, and for a while neither spoke, letting the day's fear drain out slow the way it does after danger passes and leaves the body shaking in its wake. You've a scar, Caleb said finally, nodding at her jaw, gentler than the words might have sounded from another man. Boone's doing. Mara's hand rose briefly to the mark, an old habit. Before Boone. My mother's horse spooked when I was 12, threw me into a fence post. She sat with me 3 days while the fever came and went, telling me the same story over and over so I wouldn't be afraid of the dark. About a girl who outran a storm because she refused to believe it could catch her. A faint, worn smile. She died the winter after. The land's the only thing of hers I've got left that Boone hasn't managed to touch. That's why you won't sell. That's why I'd rather marry a stranger than let it go, she said. It isn't dirt to me, Mr. Hart. It's the last place my mother's voice still lives. Caleb turned his cup slowly between his hands, feeling the old weight rise in his chest, the one he rarely let surface. I had a wife, he said, the words coming out rusty, and used. Before the war took the years it took. She didn't die of anything so clean as fever. She died waiting on a husband who came home in pieces he never told her about, and one night I said something I've spent every year since trying to unsay, and she left, and I let her, because some part of me thought I deserved exactly that kind of empty. Mara was quiet, but she didn't look away, didn't flinch from the confession the way people sometimes did, as though grief were catching. Is that why you keep to yourself out here? Punishing yourself for something you can't fix by being alone? Maybe, Caleb admitted. Man gets used to a kind of quiet that feels safer than trying again. Scars mean it lived, Mara said softly, touching her jaw once more. That's what my mother used to say, when I hated the mark. Not that it hadn't hurt. Just that whatever had tried to take me hadn't managed it. Caleb looked at her a long moment, something in his chest loosening that had been clenched tight for longer than he could easily count. That's a decent way to carry a scar. It's the only way I've found that doesn't eat a person hollow. She reached into the satchel she'd brought, drawing out a small carved wooden bird, worn smooth from handling. My father made this, before the debts, before the fear got so loud in him it drowned out the man he used to be. I keep it to remember he wasn't always frightened. That the fear is a season, not the whole of him. Caleb took the bird when she offered it, turning it in the lamplight, feeling the careful work of it, a father's hands trying to give his daughter something steady in an unsteady world. Man who could carve like this once isn't gone for good, he said. Just misplaced. I hope you're right. She took the bird back, careful, and something passed between them in the exchange that hadn't been there that afternoon, not quite trust yet, but the beginning shape of it, fragile and real. Mara. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and she noticed. Whatever we decide about Boone and the debt and this marriage your father's arranged, I want you to know the choice is yours. I won't have you signing your life to me the same way you'd have signed it to him. Traded, instead of chosen. Her eyes searched his in the lamplight, looking for the lie and not finding one. And if I choose it anyway? Not for the debt, not for the land, not because Boone leaves me no other door. Then maybe, Caleb said, and this time the word carried something warmer than caution, you and I sit here a good deal longer than one evening, and we find out what a marriage looks like when nobody's forcing either hand. Outside, the wind had died to almost nothing, and the stars had come out hard and bright over the ridge, the kind of sky that made a person feel small and, somehow, less alone for it. Mara set the wooden bird on the table between them, a small offering, and did not take it back. 3 days, she said quietly. Whatever we decide, we'd best decide fast. Boone won't wait past that, and my father's debt won't forgive itself. Then let's decide, Caleb said, and let's decide it right, not around Boone's clock, but ahead of it. They rode into Piedra Seca together 2 mornings later, before the sun had fully cleared the ridge, Caleb driving the wagon and Mara beside him with the wooden bird tucked safe in her satchel. Emery Whitfield met them on the porch of his modest house, his face folding through surprise, shame, and something like relief all at once. You didn't have to come, he said to his daughter, though his eyes were on Caleb, measuring. I did, Mara said. And so do you. Boone's note comes due today, and we're not settling it his way. Inside, over coffee neither of them drank, Caleb laid out the plan plain, the marriage would happen, but not as Boone had shaped it, not as a trade for silence and land. Caleb would cover the $400 of the debt outright. 3 years of forge work had left him more solvent than a blacksmith usually let on, and he'd rather spend it buying a frightened man's freedom than watching Boone buy a daughter's. The creek land would remain deeded to Mara alone, untouched, unmentioned in any paper Boone could later twist. "He'll fight it," Emery said, wringing his hands. "Boone doesn't lose gracefully." "Boone's already lost," Caleb said. "He just hasn't been told yet." Boone was told an hour later, in the dusty office of the Larrabee Trading Company, with the full $400 laid on the desk in Caleb's steady hand and the marriage certificate, signed freely, by both parties, witnessed by the town clerk, laid beside it. "This changes nothing," Boone said, though the color had gone from his face. "Changes everything," Caleb said. "Debt's paid. Land's hers, clean, no claim of yours on it now or ever. And the girl you meant to corner into marrying you chose different, in front of God and the clerk both. You can ride out to that creek any time you like, Boone. You'll just be trespassing when you do." Boone's jaw worked, some last calculation flickering and dying behind his eyes. Whatever he might have said next, he swallowed it, because there was nothing left to say that wouldn't cost him more than his pride already had. "This town's small," Boone said finally, low, more warning than threat now, the fight gone out of it. "We'll cross paths again." "I imagine we will," Caleb said. "I imagine you'll find me exactly where I've always been. At the forge. Not hiding from anything anymore." Boone left without another word, and the office was quiet a long moment after, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm has finally, truly passed. That evening, back at the forge, Mara stood in the doorway where she'd first appeared 2 days before, though everything about the moment felt changed, not a debt handed over, not a stranger measuring a stranger, but two people who'd chosen each other in the space danger and fear had tried to close. "You never did answer me proper," she said. "That first day. My father said you needed a wife, and I asked, and all you ever gave me was maybe." Caleb crossed the yard to stand before her, the forge fire glowing low and warm behind him, the same fire that had lit that first uncertain conversation now lighting something entirely different. "Maybe," he said, "you were worth waiting on an honest answer instead of a quick one. And now that I've got the honest one," he took her hand, careful, the way a man handles something he intends to keep whole, "it isn't maybe anymore. It's yes. It always was going to be yes, once I was sure it was you choosing it, and not the debt." Mara's eyes shone in the firelight, and for the first time since she'd ridden up that dusty road, the guardedness in her had nowhere left to hide. "Then yes," she said, "from me, too. Not the land, not my father's fear, not Boone's threats. Just yes." They were married proper the following spring, in the small church at the edge of town, with Emery Whitfield standing straighter than he had in years and the whole of Piedra Seca turning out to see the blacksmith who'd paid off a debt with nothing asked in return but an honest choice. Years later, when their own children asked about the carved wooden bird that sat on the mantel, worn smoother still from decades of small hands, Mara would tell them about a father who carved it in a season of fear he didn't stay lost in, and about a blacksmith who'd once said maybe to a stranger in his doorway and meant it as a promise all along. The forge still stands today at the edge of what used to be Piedra Seca, its fire long cold, but travelers passing through still hear the story from old-timers at the Mercantile, of the debt paid in full, the land that stayed in a mother's name, and the two words carved quietly into the beam above the door, worn soft by weather and time, chosen. Not traded.